The hardest thing you will ever do is nothing. Jung discovered that the moment you stop trying to fix your life is the exact moment it begins to fix itself. This sounds like spiritual nonsense until you understand the psychological law that makes it true. There is a reason why giving up control is the only way to gain it. Here's what Jung discovered. Modern people are obsessed with forcing outcomes. You try to control your career trajectory. You manipulate your relationships to feel secure. You attempt to manage every emotion before it fully arrives. This creates a psychological pressure cooker. The more you tighten your grip on life, the more anxiety floods your system. Your nervous system stays activated. Your mind never rests. You become exhausted from the effort of trying to orchestrate reality. Jung observed something that made his blood run cold. The ego believes it is the captain of the ship. It thinks it steers your life through conscious decisions and willpower. But Jung realized the ego is actually just a tiny cork, bobbing on the surface of a vast ocean. That ocean is your unconscious. The unconscious contains everything you are that you don't know you are. It holds patterns, instincts, and organizing principles far more intelligent than your conscious mind. When the ego tries to force outcomes, it fights against currents it cannot see and powers it cannot comprehend. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives in this battle. They wake up each morning constructing elaborate strategies. They make lists and plans and contingencies. They try to predict every variable and control every outcome. And with each passing year, they feel more anxious, more exhausted, more disconnected from any sense of natural flow. They are fighting a war against their own nature, and it is a war they cannot win. This is where the ancient concept of Wu Wei enters. Jung became fascinated with a Taoist text called The Secret of the Golden Flower. He wrote extensive commentary on it because he recognized something revolutionary. The Chinese had discovered thousands of years ago what Western psychology was just beginning to understand. Wu Wei translates roughly as action through non-action or effortless doing. This is not laziness, this is psychological non-resistance. The Taoists understood something profound about human nature. They recognized that life has its own intelligence, its own organizing principles, its own rhythms and patterns. When you align yourself with these natural forces, rather than fighting against them, everything becomes easier, not because the external world changes, but because your relationship to it transforms completely. Jung saw this principle operating in his clinical practice repeatedly. Consider a composite case profile based on patterns he observed across multiple patients. A woman suffering from chronic insomnia had tried everything to force herself to sleep. Warm milk, breathing exercises, strict bedtime routines, sleeping pills. The harder she tried, the worse her insomnia became. Her ego was desperately attempting to control an unconscious process. Sleep cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. In this narrative illustration, Jung instructed her to stop trying to sleep entirely. Instead, she was told to lie awake consciously, observing her thoughts without resistance. She was to welcome the wakefulness rather than fight it. She was to stop treating sleeplessness as an enemy to be defeated and start treating it as a message to be understood. Within 2 weeks, she was sleeping normally. The moment she stopped fighting the sleeplessness, it dissolved. Now contrast this with another composite example drawn from Jung's clinical observations. A man suffered from severe anxiety about his career advancement. He tried to control every variable. He networked compulsively. He revised his resume obsessively. He prepared for interviews until he memorized perfect responses to every possible question. He strategized every conversation with his superiors. He calculated every move like a chess player trying to engineer checkmate. His anxiety intensified with each effort. The more he tried to force his career forward, the more stuck he felt. Jung recognized what was happening. The man's ego was attempting to force an outcome, which created tension between his conscious will and his unconscious needs. His entire system was in conflict. His body knew something his mind refused to acknowledge. The path he was forcing himself down was not aligned with his deeper nature. Jung suggested he stop all career manipulation for 1 month. Just show up to work. Do his job well. But stop trying to orchestrate his professional future. Stop networking with agenda. Stop calculating every interaction. Stop treating his career like a military campaign, requiring constant strategic intervention. The man reluctantly agreed, terrified that without constant effort, everything would collapse. Within 3 weeks, a former colleague contacted him unexpectedly about an opportunity that perfectly matched his skills and interests. An opportunity he never could have manufactured through his desperate controlling efforts. An opportunity that emerged only when he created psychological space for the unexpected to enter. This illustrates what Jung called the tension of opposites. Your psyche operates like a self-regulating system. When you pull too hard in one direction through conscious effort and control, the unconscious automatically pulls back in the opposite direction to restore balance. The more you try to force certainty, the more the unconscious generates doubt. The harder you chase happiness, the more it produces dissatisfaction. This is not punishment. This is your psyche. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Trying to remain whole. Think about this mechanically. Your psyche contains opposing forces, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, order and chaos. These opposites need each other. They create the tension that generates psychological energy and growth. When you identify completely with one pole and try to eliminate the other, you create internal war. The rejected pole does not disappear. It goes underground and begins working against you from the shadows. The ego is the small mind. It can hold maybe 7 pieces of information consciously at any given moment. It operates in linear time. It sees only surfaces. It knows only what it has already experienced or been taught. It is fundamentally limited in its capacity to perceive and process reality. The self, which Jung distinguished from the ego, is the greater psyche. It includes both conscious and unconscious contents. It processes thousands of variables simultaneously. It sees patterns across years and across generations. It holds wisdom that the ego cannot access through effort. When you let go, you allow the self to organize things that the ego cannot understand. Use this analogy. Imagine a pool of muddy water. You want to see the bottom clearly. If you stir the water frantically trying to clear it, you only make it muddier. The sediment swirls everywhere. Visibility gets worse, not better. But if you simply wait, if you allow the water to settle without interference, gravity does the work for you. The sediment falls, the water clears. You see the bottom with perfect clarity. This is what happens when you stop trying to force your life into submission. The psychological sediment settles. The self begins organizing your experience according to deeper patterns than your conscious mind can perceive. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, solutions emerge, not because you made them happen, but because you stopped preventing them from happening. Your constant interference was the obstacle. Your frantic efforts to control were creating the very chaos you feared. The moment you step back and allow your deeper intelligence to operate, things begin organizing themselves according to principles more sophisticated than anything your conscious mind could design. Jung documented a phenomenon that modern people dismiss as coincidence, but which he considered deeply significant: synchronicity. He noticed that the moment patients truly surrendered attachment to specific outcomes, external events seemed to align in their favor. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of a woman who stops obsessing about finding a partner and suddenly meets someone compatible at a random bookstore. A man releases his desperate need for financial security and receives an unexpected inheritance. A patient quits forcing creative work, and inspiration floods back naturally. This is not magic. This is psychological alignment. When you stop fighting yourself, when your ego stops battling your unconscious, your energy becomes unified rather than divided. You stop sending contradictory signals into the world. Your presence changes. People perceive you differently. You are no longer emanating the desperate frequency of someone trying to force outcomes. You begin emanating the calm confidence of someone aligned with their own nature. Opportunities you were unconsciously blocking become visible. Your perception expands because you are no longer tunnel-visioned on one specific outcome. Paths that were always there but obscured by your psychological noise suddenly appear obvious. Conversations happen differently because you are listening rather than calculating. Connections form naturally because you are present rather than performing. Think about what happens physiologically when you try to control everything. Your sympathetic nervous system activates. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Your prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making, gets overridden by your amygdala, which only knows fight or flight. You literally become stupider when you try to force outcomes. Your perception narrows. Your creativity shuts down. You make worse decisions. While believing you are being more strategic, your immune system weakens, your digestion suffers, your sleep degrades, your body interprets constant psychological control as constant threat. It maintains a state of emergency. It diverts resources away from healing, growth, and creativity toward immediate survival. You are running a system designed for occasional acute stress in a mode of chronic activation. This destroys you slowly. But here is the terrifying part. Most people never learn to let go until they have no other choice. They continue forcing, controlling, manipulating their lives until something breaks. A health crisis, a devastating loss, a complete psychological breakdown. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, but he recognized it not as punishment, but as the unconscious, finally forcing the ego to surrender because it refused to do so voluntarily. The person who refuses to let go creates their own suffering. They develop neurosis, anxiety disorders, depression, psychosomatic illness. Their body starts manifesting the psychological tension they refuse to address consciously. Their relationships become transactional and empty because they are manipulating rather than connecting. Their work becomes joyless because it is driven by fear rather than genuine interest. They cycle through the same painful patterns repeatedly, each time believing they just need to try harder, control better, force more effectively. But the trying is the problem. The control is the disease. The forcing is what breaks them. Each effort to grip tighter creates more pressure. Each strategy to force outcomes generates more resistance. They are tightening a knot that can only be loosened by releasing it. Jung treated patients who had suffered catastrophic breakdowns. Let's examine a narrative illustration based on patterns he repeatedly observed. Successful executives who had heart attacks at 40, perfectionists who developed autoimmune conditions, controllers who experienced complete psychological collapse. In almost every case, he found the same root cause. They had refused to let go of outcomes. They had insisted their ego could manage their entire existence. And their unconscious, which will not be ignored indefinitely, finally forced the issue by shutting everything down. The breakdown was not random. It was not bad luck. It was the unconscious sending the only message powerful enough to break through the ego's defenses. When gentle signals are ignored, when subtle symptoms are suppressed, when quiet wisdom is dismissed, The unconscious escalates. It speaks louder. It manifests more dramatically. It will be heard, one way or another. This is the warning. If you do not learn to let go consciously, your psyche will force you to let go unconsciously. And when the unconscious does the forcing, it rarely does so gently. You can choose surrender, or surrender will be chosen for you. But surrender is inevitable because the ego was never actually in control, it only believed it was. So what does conscious letting go actually look like? It is not passivity. It is not giving up on goals or abandoning responsibility. It is not becoming lazy or indifferent. It is a fundamental shift in how you relate to outcomes. You still take action. You still make decisions. You still work toward what matters to you. But you release your death grip on how things must unfold. You hold your preferences lightly rather than desperately. Jung described this as conscious participation in your own unfolding. You become an active observer of your life rather than a frantic manager of it. You notice what wants to emerge rather than forcing what you think should happen. You follow your genuine interest rather than manufactured obligation. You respond to what life presents rather than demanding life conform to your script. You trust that the self has access to information and organizing principles that your ego cannot perceive. This requires something that terrifies most people: faith in your own nature. Not religious faith necessarily, but psychological trust. Trust that you contain wisdom beyond your conscious awareness. Trust that your psyche is fundamentally oriented toward wholeness and growth. Trust that when you stop interfering, something more intelligent than your ego will guide you. Most people have no such trust. They believe they are fundamentally broken and must be constantly managed and controlled, or they will fall apart. This belief itself creates the fragmentation they fear. The unconscious responds to being treated as an enemy by behaving like one. But when you approach your own depths with curiosity rather than fear, with trust rather than suspicion, the entire dynamic shifts. Your unconscious becomes an ally rather than an adversary. Your symptoms become messages rather than punishments. Your obstacles become invitations rather than barriers. Your life stops feeling like a battle you are losing and starts feeling like a conversation you are learning to understand. Letting go is actually an act of supreme courage. It feels like losing because we have been conditioned to believe that control equals safety and surrender equals defeat. But in psychological reality, the opposite is true. The more you try to control, the more powerless you become. You exhaust yourself managing variables you cannot actually manage. You create the illusion of power while experiencing the reality of impotence. The more you surrender to your own deeper nature, the more genuine power emerges. Not power over external circumstances, but power to respond authentically to whatever circumstances present themselves. Not the power to force outcomes, but the power to remain aligned with your own truth, regardless of outcomes. This is not about winning in the conventional sense. It is about changing the game entirely. The ego plays the game of accumulation and achievement and external validation. The self plays the game of integration and authenticity and internal coherence. The ego asks, how can I get what I want? The self asks, who am I becoming? And is this aligned with my deepest nature? When you shift from the ego's game to the self's game, external outcomes often improve dramatically. But this happens as a side effect of alignment, not as the result of forcing. You become more creative because you stop blocking creative flow. You attract better relationships because you stop relating from fear and need. You make better decisions because you access deeper intelligence. You experience more satisfaction because you stop seeking it externally and start recognizing it internally. Jung spent decades studying patients who had made this shift. What he found astonished him. They did not become passive or detached. They became more engaged with life, but from a completely different orientation. They worked with reality rather than against it. They responded to what life presented, rather than demanding life conform to their plans. They found opportunities in obstacles. They discovered meaning in difficulty. They stopped being victims of circumstance and became participants in their own evolution. The final insight is this: letting go is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a daily choice. The ego will always try to reassert control because that is its nature. Your job is not to eliminate the ego, but to develop a different relationship with it. You acknowledge its concerns without being ruled by them. You listen to its fears without letting them dictate your choices. You appreciate its efforts while recognizing its limitations. This is the art of psychological maturity that Jung spent his life mapping. You learn to inhabit the tension between doing and allowing, between effort and surrender, between conscious choice and unconscious unfolding. You develop the capacity to act decisively while holding outcomes lightly. You pursue what matters while remaining open to what you had not imagined. You make plans while staying flexible when life presents something better. So if you are exhausted from trying to control your life, consider this. The thing you fear most, letting go, might be exactly what saves you. The surrender you have been avoiding might be the doorway to the life you actually want, rather than the life you think you should want. The moment you stop forcing might be the moment everything you truly need begins to flow. Jung discovered that letting go is not losing. It is winning by changing the rules. It is not weakness. It is accessing strength you did not know you possessed. It is not giving up. It is finally beginning to live in alignment with your deepest nature. If you are ready to explore what lies beneath the surface of your conscious mind, subscribe. If you are ready to discover what happens when you stop fighting yourself and start trusting the intelligence of your own psyche, join me in investigating the dimensions of consciousness that most people never even know exist. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.